You know, you worried about catching some of your members doing some Colombian Bam Bam?
Some booger sugar, right?
Booger sugar.
I'm Arizona Family political editor Dennis Welch.
Dennis, fake news Welch. Try to tell the truth.
And this is the Politics Unplugged podcast.
Dennis, if you have a problem with substance abuse, I am more than willing to talk to you anytime you need.
All right, welcome back to another edition of the Politics Unplugged podcast edition today. I'm really glad and happy to be joined today by Jim Small, works over at the Arizona Mirror, and Doug Cole, longtime political insider. Worked for governors and all sorts of folks over there, a long history down to the legislature. I'm really happy to be joined by both of them today. Thank you very much. I hope you had a great New Year and a killer Christmas or holiday season or whatever
We did. Thank you. Hope likewise, Dennis. You got some time off.
Yeah, we got a little time off. It was fun, and as is tradition, you go through the holiday season, have a great time, get some time off, you come back, and bam, it's the legislative session. It's why I brought both of you on here today, because I can't think of two people who are more versed in legislative politics and policy down there than you two. So thank you very much for being here.
Our pleasure.
And let's just start with you, Jim. I mean, what do you expect this year? Just kind of like, a 100,000-foot level out of this legislature. Heading into the election year, it's always hard to disassociate the politics from the policy down there. What are you expecting?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure to get done quickly to try to end the session. Technically, sessions are supposed to be 100 days. We've seen in the past how that goes. Last year was obviously
July 31st.
Yeah, right. So that would be bad news for anyone who wants to be on the campaign trail, because our primary elections are in August. So staying into the deep summer is a real problem for legislators. They're going to want to get out quickly. I think the issue is going to be, can they figure out a way to do that? You know, the budget was a big deal last year. For obvious reasons, it was the first year we had a Democratic governor in Katie Hobbs and this new Republican-controlled legislature. That dynamic stays the same, but the big change on the budget front is that the state is now looking at a deep shortfall, and one that's growing quickly to the point where budget analysts right now aren't even really saying what they think it's going to be. I think we're going to be another few weeks before we get that idea.
I think the last we knew was about $850 million when you combine the current fiscal year budget with what's projected for next year. Was like $850 million.
I think the appropriations chairman are using $1 billion plus.
Okay.
I mean, that's kind of that's
where we're
target
headed
right now. Yeah. I mean, estimates have been anywhere from 600 to 1.2 billion, but they will say in the same breath, it's not a structural problem. It's just in the next few years.
So for our wonderful listeners who are very educated and up to date on things, and who may not, but some of whom may not know what a structural deficit is, explain simply what a structural deficit is.
Simply?
Yes.
Simply. With my Coolidge High School math. Born and raised in Pinal County here.
Coolidge has a great school system, by the way.
It does. The easy way of explaining it is that there's no way out unless you find more revenues.
You've got permanent ongoing spending that's outpacing what you're bringing in.
Yes. So you look at forecasting. Budgeting is very, very complicated, especially when you're dealing with a state that all states have the same problem, because you have federal funds that fund so much of state operations that are all kind of, quote, off the books in Arizona. We're one of the few states that the legislature does not appropriate federal funds. The governor does that. And every year, we see frequently bills that will come and require that. So, there's so many funds that come in, but a structural deficit means there's really no way out without finding new revenue sources or reducing ongoing spending.
Okay.
The formulaic to schools would have to be cut and things like that. So a non-structural deficit can be fixed by looking at reducing one-time revenues, doing fund sweeps and things like that, until the forecast down the road where revenues meet expenditures.
So if I was,
I know that wasn't an easy explanation.
So if I could use it, break that down into my Iowa folksy wisdom down there, Jim. I mean, it's basically with a non-structural deficit, you can chop your way, cut your way, slash your way out of it, right?
Yeah, I mean, and it's more temporary measures, right? I mean, I think that would be the idea, right? Like you could borrow from the rainy day fund. You could sweep some funds. You know, there's a whole lot of dedicated state funds. You can take money from them. You can do some accounting tricks, right, where they push off a bill from the last month of a fiscal year into the next month, into the first month of the next fiscal year. Things like that.
K-12 rollover, that's called.
Yeah. Exactly. And you know, and that's something that that's really arcane and really in the weeds. But I mean, there are some relatively pain-free ways to get through a short-term, smaller deficit.
Like the projects that they used to get the budget passed last year, that that they wanted to build with that one-time money. That could be delayed. They could take that away, chop that off, like freeway expansions, and the $15 million, $20 million for the Prescott Rodeo. That was there was a lot of controversy over that. You could claw back that money. Or delay some of those projects.
Assuming the money hasn't already gone out the door, right?
Yeah,
and that's kind of the issue. It's like at this point when they start doing it, you're halfway through a fiscal year. So
well, the big dollar stuff obviously is transportation, okay? And so that what they did is they forward funded a lot of these things that have been in the 5-10 year transportation plan that ADOT puts out. So you pull those back, you slow them down. So that's one way. Prescott Rodeo, that's $16 million that was going to the nonprofit up there. That's in litigation under the gift clause in the Constitution.
But a tiny fraction of a $1 billion plus.
Yeah, but the big number stuff is the current budget does not account for the Prop 123 that was passed back in 2015.
Prop 123 was for education.
Yes.
It was a vote that upped the percentage of money that comes out of the state trust land fund. That money then is diverted as it goes to education. That is set to expire at the end of 2025.
Right, and so they put a sunset on it, and so that's $300 million. If they just re-up that, okay, there's $300 million. That's taken care of, and that's ongoing. Okay, so that helps with the long term. That would be in the structure category. So that's one thing. Doing those type of pulling back some of this money, delaying some of the big transportation projects, that would be another thing. Then you do the fund sweeps that Jim was just talking about, that are very popular. You have all
popular
these,
with lawmakers.
Yeah, well, I bet you have all
not
these
popular with the people whose funds are getting swept.
Right, and these are funds that people pay fees into, and they're designed that they have cushions. Then the legislature every decade comes in and sweeps them out.
And so, Jim, you've been down there for a long time. I feel like you and I've been down there for. I think only Howie's been down there longer than you and I. But anyway, cutting versus spending down there when there's extra money down there versus having to cut stuff out there. What do you think is easier to get done and get compromise on down to down to legislature?
They both present their own challenges, right? When you have more money, I think we saw it last year. The difficulty is how do you tell people no when they come to you with an idea for, hey, I want to do this project, right? And so last year, the novel solution they came up with was, we're going to give everyone an equal pot of money and just tell them, go do whatever you want with it.
Well, not an equal. If you're Republican, you were more equal than the Democrat minority.
Correct. They within the caucuses, they gave, they basically divvied up the surplus and said, here you go.
Yeah.
Do whatever you want with it. Do your own thing. Collaborate with someone, get a group of people together, figure out how you want to handle it. But if you're going to do that and we put it in the budget, you got to vote yes, right?
Yep.
So that was kind of the carrot that they used then. When it comes to cutting, I mean, I think that's difficult because no one wants to see their ox get gored. Yeah. And you've got a lot of people who have priorities, and so I think that can be more challenging because you have to convince people that they have to vote for cuts. But at the same time, the conversations are a lot different. Anyone who's coming to you with their hat in hand saying, hey, I have this idea for a project, they're instantly tossed out. And those don't get entertained even a little bit.
And it's harder to run on cutting stuff with specific stuff like that. Now, you can run on cutting taxes. That's always great. But when you cut and you have a specific program that is popular, you're asking these lawmakers to then, get out of session, go run for re-election, and their opponents could be saying, well, this person, cut this program that you all like. I promise, if as an opponent, like, I'm not going to do that.
Well, I've always found, having been down there since the early '90s, I've always found that budget years that are deficit years like this, and especially if they're non-structural, and almost everybody agrees it's not structural at this point. If we do the 1, 2, 3, bring that back online, I find that it's an easier process because you're going to have Livingston and Kavanaugh, who are the two approach chairs. They just won't hear any additional spending bills. It just won't happen, and so you don't have this race. And the politicians and the legislators can tell their constituents, we don't have any money, so I can't introduce this pet project of yours that you want to do. We just don't have any money. So I am optimistic that because we have to find some money to balance the budget out, and it's an election year, that we won't be here like we were last year on July 31st. I hope that what Speaker Toma has been saying here in the last week that we could do 100, 120, 150 day session. That would be welcome.
Yeah, well,
120 days at the max. I'm sorry.
Talk is cheap at this point. Let's talk a little bit about the governor. We don't know everything that she's going to be proposing. We do know, though, that she is once again going to be taking another shot at trying to rein in the school voucher program that has really ballooned in popularity and in its expense. But it is she is changing her stance. Last year, she wanted to repeal the universal expansion component of all that. That didn't go over very well. Now she's looking to put more guardrails on this program. She hopefully, more reporting requirements, giving the state auditor general authority to go look at how this money is being spent.
You can't buy a new grand piano for your living room.
Yeah, exactly. I thought it was interesting too, capping private schools from increasing their tuition above inflation, things like that. Jim, what's the expectation that the governor could get any of this done? Because this is a die-on-the-hill issue for Republicans. ESA, or the ESA program, the Universal School Voucher Program, is a big deal, and Arizona is on the avant-garde of that. With the Republican Party, I don't see a lot of Republicans willing to compromise with this governor on that ESA program at all.
No. Last year's proposal to scrap the entire universal thing was an unserious proposal. It came out, and it was laughable that was kind of the position that she took, because it was never going to happen, never going to be serious.
That was a sop to her base, though.
Absolutely.
She had to do that for her base, but you're right. It wasn't going anywhere.
They abandoned it immediately. She's mentioned it in State of the State, and then maybe once or twice else, and then they were like, "Well, what do you mean? Well, no, we're fine. We'll be okay." This is more serious in the sense that at least it's a concrete set of proposals and things that say, "Hey, here are the problems we see with the system." And here are the ways that we can make it work better. We can make it more accountable. We can make sure that it is, if we're going to spend taxpayer dollar on it, that we're going to get our bang for the buck and that it's going to be spent wisely and appropriately. In the same regard, though, this Republican legislature is not going to go for this. Maybe, I don't know if they'll go for any of it. Maybe there are some small pieces of it that they might take and pull out and,
I think maybe
whittle down into something that kind of vaguely resembles what the governor proposed.
I think one of those things could be like the school safety stuff, like the fingerprinting component. I think Ken Bennett, Senator Ken Bennett, Republican, has said that he's going to introduce his own version. Now, one of what Hobbs things that she wants out of this is for people who work at private schools and that take this public money, is to be fingerprinted to increase security for lots of things like that. That might be something there could be some compromise on, but Ben Toma's already told me he thinks there's enough accountability in this program as it is already, and that the contracts are between the state and the parents and not the private school and the parents, almost like the parents are a pass-through on this. What do you think about, is there enough transparency in the way that this public money is being spent?
Well, there's going to have to be more transparency eventually. I don't see much happening this session, because you're going to. I'm jokingly mentioned the grand piano. We hear anecdotal stories like that all the time, but the anecdotal stories really kind of sometimes drive the policy behind it. But this is an election year. You got a speaker who's running a very vigorous race to replace Debbie Lesko in Congressional District Number 8. This is one of his key accomplishments as Speaker, along with the 2 6.5% flat tax rate that he did as majority leader with Governor Ducey. Those he views those as his touchstone issues. And so I don't see a heck of a lot. I mean, last session they agreed to do a study committee on ESAs, and
that study committee went nowhere.
And people wouldn't even show up for the study committee. So with the makeup of this legislature and the Democratic governor, I'm not optimistic a lot's going to happen in this upcoming session.
Well, it brings up a question, too, Jim. It's interesting. Do you think the governor can do a better job this year? I mean, last year is her first year in office. I think the training wheels were still on. Lots of learning. We've all seen governors. That first year, it's a tough year.
Every governor goes through that.
There's a learning process.
No governor doesn't go through basically a training first year.
There's no job that's training. That's a training ground for being governor. Yeah. Do you think she'll do better this year than she did last year? She's changed chiefs of staff. She's now got, Chad Campbell has been a guest on the pod before. He's now running the ninth floor for the governor at this point. Is it going to be better for her this year? Is she going to get some better outcomes?
Yeah, I think just the experience of having gone through last year puts her in a better position, right? I think learning that transition of going from a lawmaker like she was, that was her experience at the Capitol, right? Yeah. Is as a legislator. And I think making that transition from kind of the legislator mindset into the more executive mindset, I think is huge. And I think we saw it with Jan Brewer as an example, right? Yeah. With someone who was
a former state legislator, a former secretary of state.
Right. Yeah. They followed a very similar path here, right? Yeah. And so, I think we saw that with her, in particular, that first session that she was down there. I think that there were a lot of complaints that she was very hands-off and didn't tell lawmakers what she wanted. And they felt like they were in the dark. They would send something to her. A Republican-controlled legislature sent them into a Republican governor, and it would get rejected. And they go, "Why? We don't know. We didn't hear anything. We didn't get any feedback. We weren't told." I think that there was some of that in the Hobbs administration. We heard from a lot of people, Democrats and Republicans, that the governor's office was not present really in the legislature last year, and some of that I'm sure is owing to just the massive uptake. Trying to take over an administration, trying to figure out where everything is and who's doing what and all of the things that go along with it. But, I do think that that's going to be different this time. I mean, I think that someone like Chad Campbell comes in and is going to have a different approach, I think, than his predecessor did.
Wait, you've got her whole legislative team is new. She's hired Lourdes Pena. She's hired Marge Stilla from the city of Tempe, longtime intergov there. Jennifer Laredo. This is a whole new legislative
I think
team.
the biggest anecdote, the biggest metaphor, anecdotal story for how Hobbs' administration ran last year was that tamale bill. I apologize if we're talking about the tamale bill, but that was a legislative failure on her part because you've worked in ninth floor administrations, Doug. A big part of your job is killing stuff before it gets to the governor's desk because the governor may not want to veto it or have to be forced to sign it or whatever. You got to know what's coming to your desk.
Or get it fixed.
Yeah. And that bill got up to her and she vetoed it, and there was a massive outcry even from members of her own party, and they seemed to be caught off guard by that. To me, that was a big anecdote of how things were running up there. Like, you didn't even know that this bill was coming or that this was a big issue for some of your members. That was a big mistake. I would imagine with Chad up there on the ninth floor, that's not a mistake that's going to be repeated this year.
I totally agree with those very capable legislative team members that I just mentioned. That's not going to happen again. That's just not going to happen again.
And so let's talk a little bit about Republican leaders, what they want out of this session. Obviously, you've got Ben Toma running for Congress. Whether he stays Speaker or not, it's a big question mark. I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on him to step down and focus on his race at some point. But we'll see what happens with that. He said he's committed at this point for now. You got Warren Peterson. What do you think that they're trying to get out of this governor, and what do you think they'll be able to accomplish?
Well,
because remember, this governor has shown she is not afraid to use the veto stamp.
That's correct. But I don't see them sending up the amount of bills that they know that she's going to automatically veto. They got her on record on many of the subject matter policy issues that the conservative wing, the Freedom Caucus of the Republican Party, Those bills have gone up, and she has rejected them. She's on the record, so there's not a lot of utility of rinse and repeat on that. Okay, she set a record at 143 veto bills last year. But let's look at this, and I think the more important thing on the more in the immediate future is how this lawsuit plays out that Senator Peterson has filed against her on the nomination processes of her executive agencies. Now, as we all know, under Arizona law, the governor appoints directors of her agencies, and they have to go through a confirmation process in the Senate. That process has to be completed within a year, and if it's not completed, then that person and they don't get an affirmative vote of at least 16 members of the full Senate, then they must step down after a year. Well, the over 2/3 of her appointments have not made it through the process. Here we are, nearly a year later. So she pulled those back, categorized them as what an executive assistant director,
something like that.
something like that,
I mean,
which doesn't exist in law. And so now they, as soon as one of those crosses the year threshold, then it becomes ripe for lawsuits.
Yeah.
And
Well, it becomes ripe for Democrat governors and with Republican-controlled legislators because it wasn't ripe under the former governor, Doug Ducey.
who did it with his Department of Health Services director. But my point being, this hasn't been resolved.
Yeah.
And it's now, we have another branch of government you got all three branches now involved here, legislative, executive, and judicial branch. How that moves forward, how quickly that moves forward, what happens once the year is told on an individual. Are those decisions that they make legitimate? We've already had the state treasurer kick one of them out of one of the state agencies that she sits on. So that's gonna continue to be a problem, and they're gonna have to figure out some accommodation because state government has to run. So I don't know how that plays out, on the House side, but they're going to continue to do, normal Republican bread and butter issues, hold the line on spending, go after progressive leaning programs, how investments are made. I mean, the list is long. I do think that both sides, though, and we've already seen it. Representative Gail Griffin has 30, 40 bills on water. Of the 185 that's already been.
Well, that's a big issue.
And I think people are going to come together on that issue.
Well, what can they get to? Jim, do you see some situation, because an overwhelming majority, most of the water, 70% or 80%, is used with agriculture. It's used for farmers and agriculture and whatnot. Can you start seeing this governor, this legislature starting to support caps on the amount of groundwater that they're getting if they're on state trust lands?
I think that's certainly something that's in the mix, right? I mean, I know the governor had her water blue ribbon task force panel thing that was controversial in its own right because a lot of the ag people essentially walked away from it and said, we're not being listened to. We don't feel like our input is valued, and so we're not going to participate anymore. So I think that there is. This is going to be complicated. I mean, we've got the issues with the federal water and the Colorado River water, which is managed by interstate compacts and a lot of federal rules. And then we've got our local groundwater, and then all of the active management areas. So you've got different rules in different parts of the state that govern this. And so it's complicated. And it's something that, I mean, in the 20 years I've been down there, we've been talking about it for 20 years, and I'm sure it was 20 years before that. And really very little has been done because it's complicated, it's hard to get into, and honestly, it doesn't really interest voters a whole lot until you have problems where they go, hey, guess what? We're cutting your water. You can't water your lawn.
No, yes, exactly. That's when the rubber meets the road, is when it starts hitting the voter out there.
But that's what's different now, and you are correct that every, the original Groundwater Management Act came under Governor Babbitt in 1980, landmark, but it didn't touch groundwater. So but those discussions have been going on. You're right. We created the water bank in the 90s, et cetera, as good policy moving forward. But what's changed here is we see water security now, because, you know, we do a lot of polling at our firm. We see water security showing up with immigration, showing it up with education, and showing up with the economy. It's right now in the top 5.
Well, because people are starting to feel like they very soon could be paying a lot more for water,
They are going to be paying a lot
and they're
more
going
for
to be
water.
serious restrictions, like maybe you can't have that green yard that you're so proud of anymore. People are starting to pay attention to that. I mean, and let's face it, you know, the largest area of the state is in a desert. So water is an important issue, and people are starting to pay attention to that. I mean, but I mean, you know, can you get a good policy, a water policy plan together without capping or trying to cap some of the water that's being used by agriculture? I mean, you know, some people have pointed out that maybe the era of, like, you know, cotton in Arizona, it was very water intensive to grow those crops. I know it's one of the 5 C's of Arizona, sure. But, you know, does that stuff need to continue to be grown here?
Well, I think this all has really come to a head with the alfalfa farming going on in western Arizona.
No.
That was literally the water's being exported to Saudi Arabia.
Ag exports over $1 billion every year across the world to China, Japan, everywhere.
It's a huge industry in the state, and you know, I grew up on a cotton farm in Coolidge, Arizona. So
I didn't mean to pick on your cotton.
Well, that's okay. We can talk about alfalfa too, but you know, things have to evolve and change. And this is one issue now that, for once, unlike the last 20, 30 years since 40 years since the Groundwater Management Act was passed, it is an important public policy issue to the average voter.
Yep. All right, I'm kind of running out of time. God, I wish I could keep you guys here all morning. I could talk about this
You don't
all
want to
day.
talk about recounts? That's going to be right at the front and center of this.
I was going to say, like, I wanted to get to that, and then we can get to because we're in the calendar part of the year where it's the wacky bills season, and I kind of want to end with that. But real quick, there is a big issue. The counties are pushing legislative leaders and the governor to get this fixed. That law passed back in 2022, I believe it was a Michelle Ugenti-Rita bill.
It was.
It changed the threshold for recounts from 1/10% to a full 0.5%. That's going to kick off a lot more recounts. That's going to slow the certification process. After the primary, what that means is the slower process could mean that you're in jeopardy of missing that deadline to get those ballots done and printed and sent off to military members overseas. In the general election, that could mean that we miss hard and fast federal deadlines to certify our elections. Now, I've been told that has never happened in the history of the country. Nobody knows what happens if you miss that deadline. No. But it's a situation now that the counties are saying, like, look, get this fixed done. We need more time. Doug, is that going to happen?
Well, it has to happen.
It may have to happen, but this is a polarized legislature.
You have the second largest voting jurisdiction in the country, which happens to be Maricopa County, saying we need another 19 days between the primary and the general election, and we need a minimum of 17 days after in order to accommodate this new threshold. But let me just back up. Even without Michelle Ugenti's bill in 2022, I think we would have been experiencing this problem anyway. Because remember, our calendars were set up historically recognizing we were a ruby red state, and most of these races were decided by landslides. Okay, but as we have turned more purple, it becomes more of a problem. So something has to change. So they're either going to have to reduce the number of days for people to check the ballots, because there's a period of time ballots get sent out to the parties. So you either reduce that. They need to probably look at the curing period. This is the time after if you've sent in a ballot, you have by practice 5 business days. If there's a problem with your signature, that you can go back to the county recorder's office and show them a photo ID for provisional balance. They have 5 days. Maybe move that to 5 calendar days. You could also,
or I've heard cut it down to 2 days, because
Yeah.
a lot of the stuff can be done pretty quickly. But like, what I'm asking is, like, we've seen elections become this huge issue.
Yeah.
And you're going to be
But here's the problem. I mean, there's these factual things, and the county recorders and the county elections directors have presented all this to them, including moving the primary up by a week or so.
Yeah.
Into July. All of these things have proponents and opponents. Like the governor, I'm understanding, doesn't like touching the curing period. Okay, but here's what's going to make this complicated. We will see members of the legislature not just look at these fixes that will get to that additional 19 days or additional 17 days for the November. They're going to try to add election reform issues into this debate, and it really should just be. And that's going
to poison anything.
And that's what's going to be really challenging.
Yeah, I was going to come to Jim with that. I was like, well, how do you see this? Because first of all, you start talking about changing election stuff in an election year. There is a percentage out there, a good percentage of the electorate out there, that is just going to go, scream, that there's a conspiracy behind it. Especially if you start shortening the curing period. There's already skepticism that there's not enough, that the county officials, election officials, aren't really curing these problems at all anyway.
Yeah. And Arizona's kind of unique in offering a curing period.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we're very unique in that. Yeah. And, our early voting system has been around since 1991, and it's a model for the nation. So this is, all these things we're talking about have evolved over the years and have been good practices. But as soon as you made that one tinker, moving from the 1/10 into the 1/2 on the recount threshold, that really changed the clock.
Yeah, and the thing is, the way the counties are selling us, they don't want to disenfranchise the military members. That's something I think both parties will want to get behind. And then there's the big fear is, if you miss that federal mandate after the general election, I mean, you don't know what's behind door number 3. Nobody knows. Yeah. And some people are saying, like, look, you're threatening, to disenfranchise every Arizona voter if their votes
11 electoral votes
are counted or spoken for. So let's wrap up here real quick. With the fun bills. I'll start off. I mean, it's gotten a lot of attention. We've got a lawmaker down in Chandler, Julie Willoughby. I believe she was appointed, correct?
Yeah, she was appointed. Yeah,
last year.
She took Liz Harris' place.
So she's was down there for less than a full session, and apparently what she saw prompted her to say, look, you need to start random drug testing these folks. So she's got a piece of legislation out there saying that, calling for a random drug test of state lawmakers. And the interesting part about this isn't just, this is something that could lead to them getting kicked out of office, because if you failed a drug test under this piece of legislation, it would be referred to the Ethics Committee, and the Ethics Committee can propose that somebody be censured or kicked out of office. Jim, you've looked at the bill. You're not impressed with the bill overall and how it's written, are you?
I would wonder what it means to fail a drug test.
Exactly.
In a proposal that doesn't tell you what it's testing for.
No, so many unanswered questions with this bill.
Basically, what it says is any substance that's not a prescription substance would require a referral to the Ethics Committee. Well, first of all, we don't know what they're testing for, right? I mean, we've got prescriptions for a lot of things, but how exactly what are they looking at? Are they only looking for illicit substances? Are they looking for? Yeah, I mean, who knows? Because the bill is poor. It's poorly drafted. It's poorly worded. It doesn't really tell you anything. And on top of that, I think the idea that you could by law mandate legislators to submit to a random drug test for
I know.
There are certain industries where that's allowed, where that's put into state law, and there's reasons for it, right? Like there's
truck drivers,
right? Like things like that where there's health and legitimate health and safety concerns, and the state has to demonstrate what those concerns are. For this, I mean, I don't know what the concern really is, other than I guess she doesn't like her colleagues, perhaps, or think some of her colleagues are.
I'm sure she got an earful from her colleagues. What I heard, that this was a big surprise from people. I did not talk to anybody who were like, "Oh, we knew this was coming." Yeah. And if you want to, unfriend people at the legislature, keep surprising them.
and keep accusing them of all being high.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, so I can only imagine what some of the conversations in the hallway were last year, and perhaps are going to be this year.
Yeah. So I mean, the place, places. When you get beyond the politics and stuff like that, socially, it's not much different than high school down there. And you want to go out there and do stuff like this, you're not going to make a whole lot of friends down there. But Doug, what else have you seen out there that is hit your radar list as something that's a little bit different out there as far as a legislative proposal?
Well, I think that we'll see some of these social engineering bills, against DEI. They'll continue, as we discussed earlier. Those are veto bait bills.
Yep.
But they will continue, especially from the Freedom Caucus. Those things, the bathroom bills that many people call them. But I believe Speaker Tone when he says we've made our point. She's vetoed the 143. I think he's going to stop a lot of these things that he allowed across his desk, and not to proceed, because they're viewed, quote, as a waste of time. So you're always going to get these bills that are I call them statement bills.
Yeah.
They're going to make a statement,
Well, and
they will continue on. But I think we're going to see also some political shenanigans. I know that Representative Cook has some bills that goes, he's running against Senator Wendy Rogers.
Yeah.
Going to go after her residency.
Yeah.
That law, the residency laws, we all know sitting at this table has kind of been ignored over the years.
Doug,
Toothless.
Residency is a state of mind.
It's a state of mind. So we'll see things like that dealing with bots buying Taylor Swift tickets and things like that actually may go somewhere.
Yeah, there's some interesting stuff.
Yeah.
It's always an interesting part of the year because you go through this stuff and you see like, okay, this is a real proposal. Okay, this is a real problem. This is a little bit far out there. And the political stuff you're talking about, David Cook, he's again challenging Wendy Rogers, whose residency has been questioned a lot of the times, and so that's why he's trying to make some political hay out of his legislation,
Sure.
calling for stricter requirements. You have to live in the district that you're representing, and stuff like that.
Well, he's making a great argument about because your primary residence is taxed differently than any other sub. He's trying to make the point that it's tax fraud, but we're going to see. Those are the ones there's only 186 bills that have been filed right now.
Oh, yeah.
We're going to see, we usually get close to 2,000. So we'll see more. My point being, this is an election year, and people run against each other, or people want to bring people down, or promote people. We'll see all kinds of fun stuff that will try to accomplish those things.
All right, we're going to have to end it right there before we leave. What was any New Year's resolutions this year from you guys?
Oh gosh, You know what? I don't know. I didn't really make. No, I mean, 2023 was a blur, and I'm happy to leave it behind and hoping for just a better 2024 all around.
Yeah, Doug?
I hope that our democracy can pull through another election. And I'm going to continue to talk about that through any chance I get, such as in these type of things. We got to look at the big picture here. This cultural warfare, this personality cult, situation we have going on. We need to be aspirational, and we need to learn how to work with each other, and remember what a great country and a great state this is. And I'm going to continue to talk about it because we can't let all of this be destroyed, and we can't burn our house down.
All right. Well, again, I made no personal New Year's resolutions because I didn't want to let myself down. So that's where we're at. Thank you both for joining us here today.
Anytime,
Thanks,
guys.
guys.
Thanks for
And
having us
enjoy
on.
the rest of enjoy the year, and I'm sure we'll be talking more
I
as
hope
this
so.
year progresses. And and on the other side, we'll be talking with producer extraordinaire Colin joins us to wrap this show up. Welcome back. Good to see you again, Colin. Hope you had a great New Year. You took a little time off between Christmas and New Year and whatnot.
It was wonderful, yeah.
And I know you're looking forward to this legislative session. It's going to be a laugh. It's going to be a laugh a minute down there.
So does anything get accomplished?
Some of the stuff is just, you got to get a budget done by law. I mean, other than that, who knows what gets accomplished down there? The politics of this coming year, it complicates seriously everything. I mean, one of the big points, if you listen through the podcast this far, thank you very much. And toward the end of the discussion with Doug and Jim, I think a big point there was they have an immediate fix the problem on their hands with this election calendar.
Yes.
It can sound kind of complicated, some of the things they want to do, but bottom line is they need more time to account for the more recounts out there so they can meet these deadlines. So, service members overseas can get their ballots, and so that people's voices in the general election can have their voices heard and guarantee that their votes are certified in that election. What's going to happen with that? What could poison all that? Some of the election reform stuff we've seen, proposed by Republicans last year could muddy up the waters and kill anything up there, because this governor, again, has shown no appetite. She's a former Secretary of State. No appetite to entertain some of this reform stuff that has been inspired by, some of the baseless conspiracies out there about election fraud.
Right. Thankfully, Doug seemed fairly confident they'd get something done.
Yeah.
Because he said, well, you have to get the vote certified.
Yeah.
Which I appreciate the optimism.
Yeah.
It's hard to look at it and go, well, they'll figure something out.
And to be fair, I mean, the people really pushing this, I'm going to butcher the official name of this, but there's an association of counties out there. There's 15 counties in Arizona. Yeah. And the people that have been leading those discussions with lawmakers, they're all very positive right now. They said they've had good conversations with Republicans of all stripes, Democrats of all stripes down there at the legislature, and they feel very confident that these problems can be addressed and fixed. But again, it doesn't take much but a couple of amendments here or there that gets adopted. Right. That muddies up the waters there, that could lead to a veto or rejection, a flat-out rejection on the floor or in committees.
And I mean, this is really centrally the type of thing people just want their lawmakers to take care of. This is your job. We need to get this one thing done. Get this one thing done. Mm-hmm. And it's sad that we have skepticism on whether they can do that.
Yeah.
When it has to get done.
No.
I'm glad they're optimistic. I hope, I hope they're correct in that, and I hope they'll get it solved.
Yeah, I think they will too. And another issue, I think. I just don't know what can get done with the water issue. This is going to break down by party, but this is also going to break down by region. You're going to have the rurals versus the metros again. So we'll see what happens with that. I am not a water aficionado. It can be a very tedious, complex story to report on. Because you listen to Jim Small, like all the different entities that are involved in all this stuff. And so we'll see. There's been a lot of water bills introduced. What gets passed and what gets rejected, we'll see. But that is something that, we're thinking for long-term Arizona and its health. I mean, this has to also get done.
It does. But
there's also a saying in politics that you don't plant olive trees. They don't look that far ahead.
Yeah.
A lot of times in politics. So are they going to be able to do that? Get something done on water this year? We'll have to wait and see. And when it comes to the governor and her ESA stuff, I think maybe some school safety measures regarding that gets done. But I see very little else about that because Ben Toma again already thinks there's enough accountability. Yeah. And the governor, she points to a lot of the reports we've seen out there about misspending of this money.
Yes.
And Ben Toma says, well, we know about that misspending because there's accountability.
It's hard to imagine them giving in on much of anything. Security, sure.
Yeah.
But
we all want to protect the kids. I mean, that should be the floor, right?
Yeah. But Toma doesn't have to give on this, so I don't see any reason why he would.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll be interested to see too is how much does he stick through the entire legislative session if it starts to look like it's dragging out, because there will be a lot of pressure on him to focus on his race. There's a lot of people, and like I'd say the business communities and the chambers, from what I'm sensing, really want him to win. They look at Mr. Toma as like a more serious candidate than some of his other competitors out there.
He's someone who wants to do the job as opposed to tweet things and get
Yes,
on Fox News.
Yeah, and they
which
feel
one
like
might
he's somebody
use
they can work
better
with. You know, it's not up for me to say whether he is or he isn't, but there's a lot of pressure for him to get that done, and he's going to need money in that CD8 race, that congressional district 8 race. Bottom line is, you know, Abe Hamadeh has already gotten the endorsement of Donald Trump in this primary. Donald Trump's brand in Republican primaries is still strong until it's proven that it's not.
Yeah.
He's, you know, Trump himself is running away with the Republican nomination, if you need any more proof than that. In the general election, it's a very different animal when it comes to Trump endorsements, and we'll see Trump himself. Last time he was in a general election, he lost all his general election nominees last cycle in 22. They lost here in Arizona, but for Toma, he needs to get through the primary. He's going to need money to do that. I think he's got a good. He's well known in his district, and people like him. He's got some good endorsements out there. Debbie Lesko has endorsed him in you know, a lot of the business chambers. But does that overcome the big endorsement? Maybe the only endorsement that some people would say that matters out there, Donald Trump. He's going to need that money to do that. It's hard to raise money when you're spending day after day down to legislative session, you know, or trying to you know, pass legislation or come up with fixes with really important issues.
It is, and it's also tricky when you're in his position where he's become a very powerful leadership figure in the legislature, and that's a tough thing to walk away from because you're in a race and you're going to need a few months there where you need to focus. If you don't get the nomination there, you've given up a lot for a failed race. So I can understand his hesitancy, and I don't have any great sense of where that district is going. He's a
no. Yeah, I mean,
he's a strong candidate.
Yeah.
He doesn't have the name recognition that some of the others do.
Yeah.
So I don't.
I mean,
have
for
no
good
idea.
for good or bad, Abe Hamadeh has kept his name in the news for a long time now.
Yes, yes. There
and
are
for
a lot
some
of people there who are major, you know, who are big names, and I don't have any clue how they'll do.
Yeah, no.
Trent Franks, I don't.
Yeah, you can't. How can you forget about Trent Franks?
Yes.
You know, yeah. I mean,
Yes, everyone's jaw dropped when he entered the race, but I mean, he's certainly got name recognition.
Yeah.
He had the job before.
yeah, and you know, he first won an election in that district as a long shot candidate in a crowded primary. Can he do it again? I don't know. Blake Masters, have we heard much from him since he jumped in?
Almost nothing.
Almost nothing.
Almost
So
nothing.
You know, he's not going to get the Trump endorsement. You know, does he have the same kind of funding that he had last year? I haven't seen any proof of that yet.
Yeah.
So we'll see
tricky.
about that. So anyway, well, it's back to the grind here for the year. But I do want to go back over because, you know, as people of the podcast, of aficionados, astute listeners of this podcast know, Colin and I are college football fans, and I have to check in with you. Did you have a good bowl experience, seeing that your University of Oregon Ducks just pounded the Liberty College?
Yeah, I mean, it was better than your experience.
Oh, God, a lot better.
I mean, if you're gonna be in a bowl, you might as well win it big.
Yeah.
It was. I mean, the team looked great. Very happy for him. Happy Bo Nix can go out with a win.
Yeah.
Happy. You know, there wasn't much to not like there. I still don't understand why Liberty was put in the Fiesta Bowl. I don't understand why Oregon, after losing only to the team that's playing for the national championship, their reward, if you want to view the bowl as that, is to play Jerry Falwell's school.
It's just so weird.
And thrashing them. I mean, it was no contest. It was a weird Fiesta Bowl. I don't understand why they put Liberty in the Fiesta Bowl. I was very happy the Ducks won.
It's a bit of a Pyrrhic victory, though, too. Like, you watch the game, you're like, yeah, great, we won, but it's different than like beating a Michigan or beating a big brand or something like that.
You end up, everyone thought the Ducks should thrash them. The Ducks thrashed them. Okay.
And and we don't need to talk about the Iowa Hawkeye experience. I mean, they lost to Volunteers.
No, yeah,
a volunteer football team. I mean, come on, awful. But I would like to. I do want to ask you about this. I think the bowl system is just kind of dead. I think this year just drove a stake through it.
And I'm apparently unusual in the college football fan.
Yeah.
I like the bowl system, and I don't like the playoff. I don't like the 4-team playoff. I don't like the 12-team playoff. You're never, ever going to have a national champion. There are 130-some schools in like 10, 11 conferences. However, I don't even know how. I mean, is the Pac-12 a conference at this point? I don't know. But regardless, you can't have a legitimate champion with that many teams that have schedules that have nothing to do with each other.
Yeah,
it's just silly.
Yeah.
And I loved it when, if my school did well, they played in the Pac-12 or in the Rose Bowl against the winner of the Big Ten.
Yeah,
I loved that. It was a great tradition. Everyone liked that.
Yeah.
And you've also created a system now where it used to be you had a good year, you went to a bowl game, and then, if you won your bowl, you were happy. And we've created a system now where if you do well, maybe you make the playoff. And if you are the best team in the country, then you're happy.
Yeah.
And outside of that, you're not.
Yep.
And it's killed the bowls.
Yeah,
entirely.
now it's like, what do you look forward to? I mean, seriously, it says a lot when like the bowl that got the most chatter outside the national, the national championships games was, the bowl that involved eating a Pop-Tart.
Yes.
I mean, like, come on, man. It's just not the same anymore.
Yeah.
And there's a huge number of bowls out there. And it seems like you got to be really terrible not to be bowl eligible and go to a game.
I landed for a while on a bowl that I forget which one it was, but I believe it was a matchup of a 6-6 team against a 5-7 team.
Yeah, go for it, baby. You got that many bowls, you got to have teams.
I watched it, so what the hell?
Yeah, you got to have teams.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they don't have a bowl in my home state of Iowa, like the Cedar Rapids Pork Bowl or something like that.
Yeah.
Oh man, So I think it's dead. I think next year with the 12-team playoff, I think that's going to just further erode any interest of going to play these bowl games. Why would the best players, if they're looking to go to the NBA draft or the NFL draft, why would they even want to risk any kind of injury playing in the Cheez-It Citrus Bowl or the Pop-Tart Bowl?
And we see so many opting out now. Yeah, you don't make the playoff. You would think everyone opts out, and I don't blame them for a second. There's no reason to play in that game if you're someone who thinks they're going to be going in the draft. None. So.
All right, unless there's anything else, man, I think we should wrap it up right there. Anything else?
I got nothing.
All right, I hope everybody had an amazing new year, and it continues that way through 2024. Thanks a lot for checking in.
See you next week.
Thanks for listening. You can subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, the Google Store, or anywhere else you get your podcasts. See you next time.